Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today, my guest is Ayush Gangwal. A small introduction to Ayush is that he's a friend and colleague of mine, but currently is a freelance architect based in Aurangabad and is currently working on various residential and institutional projects across the country. Ayush was an associate architect at RMA Architects and has previously worked locally in Mumbai and Aurangabad. He has also worked internationally with firms like Palinda Kannangara Architects in Colombo and Sou Fujimoto Architects in Tokyo. He has a keen interest in architectural research and was a part of the core research team for the State of Housing exhibition organized by the Urban Design Research Institute, UDRI, and the Architecture Foundation. First of all, before I thank you for doing this podcast with me, Ayush, ever since I started the podcast, I've told all my friends I'm going to get my colleagues from the office, and 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 you have to explain how you got away all these weeks. For the so tell me, catch us up with that.
Okay, just before we start, I just want to say really I'm sorry for pushing this. I think for 3 months, more than 3 months, you've been chasing behind me, but we just moved to a new house and we started traveling and COVID in the middle. So it was kind of very messy, but finally I'm here. I'm very, very happy to do this on a nice Sunday morning. Yeah. So what you know, the last 3 months, what I've been up to, like since I left RMA?
Yeah.
Or
Sure.
uh, Okay, so a few of the projects are still confidential, but I'm working on a really interesting house in Bangalore. It's just a 2,000 square feet residential house in a very small kind of part of the city. But it's very interesting in terms of the section, but it's really small, just for a family of 4 people. And then I'm obviously associated with RMA in limited capacity, just trying to finish and get things done, which kind of were left over from a project which I was working on. And I'm working on a small, actually not so small, but like a medium-ish outhouse near Aurangabad. So these are the things which I'm working on and I'm busy with these days. And obviously, I was moving into this new house. We just finished doing the interiors of this one, so I was involved with that. But this is done now, so fine.
So on this new house, how much of a hand do you have in it?
I shopped a lot for the house, so like all the accessories and furnishings are kind of I was involved with, because my dad's also an architect, so he was kind of involved with it since beginning. But last 3 months, just in the finishing stages, the color, some furniture I wanted to keep and not keep in the house, especially in my room. If you see my room, I'll send you some photos, but there's no furniture at all. There's no bed, to sleep. I have this kind of a futon which I fold it and it becomes a sofa during the day. So it's more of a workspace for me than a sleeping space. And yeah, so there's absolutely very very little furniture. I have this really long table which I kind of it's very messy. But apart from this table, everything else is just walls. Absolutely nothing else. But the rest of the house is quite. I mean, it's finally a Marwadi house, so it's filled with quite a few stuff. Which I kind of try to avoid.
Yeah. I actually want to start off with a little bit of your formidable years. You have quite traveled a lot extensively throughout your, initial part when you're starting off. Let's start with, the first office that you ever worked in, and we'll kick our conversation from there.
Sure. So I actually have worked a lot at quite a different places. So I started working actually when I was in my second year of college. Actually, before that, if you consider working with my dad, but that was just like cleaning PCs and organizing files. But in second year, I joined this firm called S plus PS, Shilpa and Pinkish Architects. They were their office was really close to my college, and my dad knew them very well. So I used to go there after kind of college hours for 3 or 4 hours a day. And there I was just working on presentation drawings. And at that time, that firm was quite in the limelight, if I say so, but because of the collage house. But also like Pinkish was both of them, but Pinkish mostly was teaching full time at Kamla Raheja. And I always kind of like working in environments where the architects are educators themselves. Like so was Rahul or Palinda or Pinkish. I think that gives a different kind of a context to the practice where you're working. Uh, and the conversations then we have in the offices are very different than if your boss is kind of educator as well. It's different and it's interesting, and I think it's important for us to be kind of always continuing kind of be associated with that academic world, and that link kind of is very important for me as well, and that's why kind of these firms where I worked in kind of it kind of went. So from Pinkish's office in second year and third year in the summer vacations, I went to Sri Lanka, and I worked for almost a month and a half with Palinda, and that was a really interesting experience because that was the first time I was traveling abroad. I was on my own, and just then to explore all the Bawa works and then working so closely with Palinda. And the interesting part about Palinda's office is more than the architects in his office, the interns do a lot of site visits with him. So we used to tag along with Palinda, me, and there was another intern with me in almost a lot of site visits. Uh, and even if there's a new site, there's a new client coming, going and measure drawing the site across the country. It was just not restricted to Colombo. So we traveled extensively with Palinda, and then I also on the weekends traveled myself, seeing the country. I think, as I said, being an educator is important, and also like traveling is extremely important. Like the same thing kind of continued when I was in Japan as well. But just seeing works of these different architects, and just not even just famous works, but just traveling across the country, uh, seeing different landscapes, seeing different rural settlements, uh, kind of just the way people live. I think it's extremely important for us to understand that, because basically that's what we are. We are supposed to build for someone according to what they kind of live. So it's extremely important to get a hang of how people live or how people have been living. I mean, usually when architects then end up designing some things based on kind of their experience, and if they have no traveling experience or no experience working with people so closely, then they kind of build for themselves in a way. The projects become very personal for them, and they end up building something which is what an architect would he himself would imagine what should be, but not kind of what other person wants. But if you have this experience and you know how people kind of are different across and you have different expectations, I think then it kind of is interesting in how you respond to people and contexts uh, and things like that. So that was, well, again, a very short kind of internship, but I really kind of learned in Sri Lanka how nature and architecture is almost one. We had snakes in the office. I remember one day, half a day, we were just chasing this really long kind of a snake in the office because it was trying to eat one mouse in the office, and I don't know what's happening. And Palinda had recently moved to a new office. It's a beautiful building. It's at the edge of this creek, and then there are alligators. So what Palinda has done or not done, he's not built a wall along the creek. So the alligators in the evening used to come and kind of park themselves in the compound of the office. It was scary, but like for someone coming from a city context, it is scary. And then I was also then at that time, I mean, obviously I was in Sri Lanka reading about Bawa, and then about his famous Kandalama hotel. Bawa had said the building will be a success only if leopards come and visit this building. So for him, so this whole idea of we kind of try to keep animals away, and keep, even when we bring nature in, it's very artificial. You pot one beautiful Swiss cheese plant in corner of a house. That's not getting nature in. That's, you still have that distance. That's not. I don't think that is what a lot of architects these days. They just five potted plants or a balcony full of money plant. That's not bringing nature in. That's very different from what I experienced in Sri Lanka. I think they're building very close to nature. They're building almost inside really dense green. And the way a lot of Sri Lankan architects have responded to that is really, really mature and interesting to see, which sadly we don't see much of it in India. But also, I don't see that kind of a context remaining or left in India, given a few pockets. So
Yeah,
that
but
was Sri.
yeah, I actually want to go back and ask, you said your internship over there was for about 1.5 months. That's not a usual amount of time frame, is it? Like, how do you convince, when you're getting into firms like these, that I'm going to work for
That's
1 month and I'm going to leave. So how do you do that?
Um, so that was kind of not an internship for me. See, I was in third year, and that's not when usually at that time internship was only after fifth year of college. I think internships in fourth year started recently, 2 or 3 years back, but before that the internships were only kind of after 5 years. So my idea was not to go and intern in an office. My idea was more to travel in Sri Lanka, but Palinda had come to Aurangabad the same year when I had applied for internship, and uh, so my dad was the president of the local II chapter, and that's how we got him to Aurangabad, and then that's how I got to meet him. And I just told him I really want to visit Sri Lanka. And that time in third year, we were studying Bawa's work in theory of design. So I really wanted to go and see and just travel abroad. Never been outside, and Sri Lanka was really like a safe place to start to go out. And that's when I met Palinda and Varna. Both of them, they work there, and I told them I really want to come there. Don't think of me as an intern. You want to give me drawing work, you want to give me model making work, you want to give me no work or whatever work, I'm fine. I just want to be there. So I have 5 days of a week I'm busy, and 2 days of the week kind of I can then travel and explore. And luckily they agreed. So it was not an internship. I think my first serious internship was after I graduated in fifth year when I worked with case design. But working with Pinkish or working with Palinda, it was more just to know how things work in an office and just things beyond the office, nothing kind of related to architecture. I don't even remember what I drew or what projects I worked on in Sri Lanka, but I remember my conversations with Palinda, or just his keen interest in music, or just us traveling across the country, going to different site visits, the whole snake episode, the alligator. These are the things I remember. I actually don't have any memory of what drawing I did at Palinda's office, and that was kind of uh, uh, I enjoyed that a lot in that kind of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then after third year, you continue working in offices in Mumbai, right?
Yes. So yeah. So just continuing the travel story, then third year we kind of so that was third year in Sri Lanka. Fourth year we went to Spain with that was a college trip, and that was like completely different of kind of the Sri Lanka thing, and that was also very interesting. And then in fifth year, after my thesis, I first worked with case design for almost 2.5, 3 months, and the other 3 months of my internship I kind of split with, and I was working in Japan at Fujimoto's office, and then my full time job started with
So this
UDRI.
is after fifth year or in fifth year?
So my college had internship after all the academic work is over. So I finished my thesis. It was a part of the academic kind of curriculum as a whole. So I had to give my professional practice exam. But that was after all my semesters and college work and all academic work in college is done. My thesis was done in Jan 2017, and from Feb I started working at Case Design. So
Right.
I think both. I'm not sure which way I lean towards. I also think if I work, for example, at case design before I did my thesis would have been a little more different. And just in terms of. So one thing I kind of understand, and I think it's across the board and all this. I'm not sure. I'm just actually speaking about my college. We are really good. A college is really good at kind of giving that form, and spaces are beautiful, but the whole materiality aspect of buildings are missing in our projects. And I could see across the board. I mean, my colleagues at my school, the whole idea of materiality is missing. And I think if and when you go to an office like case design, it's about actually what kind of wood we use, and we debate on if it's rosewood or teak wood, and kind of you make beautiful models of wood or metal or those beautiful brass furniture pieces, lights or marble pieces. So it was completely, I had my thesis, it was just like a simple balsa wood model. And then when I went to case design, there was so much materials happening. The architecture was very simple, but then was really rich through these textures or colors or materials. So I think if I did this internship before I did my thesis, I think it could have been a more richer kind of a thesis for me. So I don't know. I think perhaps it's a good decision now that the university has decided to have internship before their thesis. But I also think that it could even go wrong. Sometimes these architects are so powering that you kind of lose your own design skills. So it was also good to have something. You close your academic life being yourself, and then you start your professional life understanding real life issues. So I'm not sure which way I lean, but I think both kind of are kind of interesting ways to look at it.
Your thesis project was indeed interesting. It was also presented at.
At
Sorry,
RMA? Were
sorry.
you there when I presented it at RMA?
No, I have seen your project through the Kurlavarki Design Forum.
You were there,
No,
like physically there?
I was later in the archives. I've noticed your work over there, so that was quite interesting. So, can you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, there's lots I can talk about on that. But I'll just give you a brief,
Yeah.
or not so brief, kind of a history, why that project and the way it materialized. I think that's more important than the project itself. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
So the whole, like third year I was infatuated with the whole Sri Lankan architecture, and in fourth year, uh, that phase was kind of more towards Japanese architecture. Before I even applied to Fujimoto's office, in fourth year we had this subject called what was it? Research something. So in there, basically, what really interested me in Japanese architecture is before I was even reading or before I had even the intention of kind of applying to Japan or working there, uh, like I used to see these really small, tiny houses, but they were really wacky in a way.
Yeah.
If we share some images, but like there are houses with no windows, or there's a house which is just glass,
Hmm.
or there are house which has like these 100 step levels, but you can't define a floor,
Hmm.
or there's a library building which has no columns, but the column itself column is not columns usually we think of these solid kind of massy cores, but that's like a very light column which you can see through. There are like staircases inside the column. So these basic things which I think Japanese architecture tried to question each element of architecture in a way, and that really interested me. And I kind of try to understand why it happens only in Japan, kind of, and not anywhere else. Because we don't see, like architecture in Europe is very building code oriented. We see really nice, spatially interesting buildings, but they're not wacky. They're not like, oh wow, you can never think of a house like this. You can never kind of imagine a terrace like that
Hmm.
or something. Uh, so I kind of I wanted to know why is Japan so special, and what's happening in Japan that it can't, say for example, happen in India. Because even in India, the building codes are not so strict that we kind of have to adhere to those building codes, and we have to make a building the way we make buildings right now. I mean, you can delete that. We have to adhere to building codes, obviously. But so that's when I started kind of reading more about Japanese architecture, and I found this really interesting kind of concept, or not so concept, but just the idea of understanding time in architecture is very interesting. So how do you define or understand what happens in architecture? So in Japan, most of I mean, it's also historic and also religious reasons. Like, a lot of earthquake happens. So they kind of don't try and build something very permanent in that sense. So the idea of impermanence is extremely important, and it's a given. Even if it's not there, it's a given in almost all Japanese architecture, especially traditional architecture, where they keep on building, and nothing is permanent for them. Because of frequent earthquakes or wars, like the cities have been destroyed and they have to rebuild it almost immediately, and then earthquakes come, tsunamis come. So because of these natural kind of events, the architecture there has developed in a very different way. So the whole idea of impermanence in architecture also comes from a lot of Buddhist philosophy. Impermanence is actually a big word in kind of Buddhist philosophy. But so when I was talking about like the idea of impermanence in architecture, and then I started reading more about like how the time manifests in architecture, and then I kind of understood this really important thing which I would try, and when I'm starting my professional practice, I would like that to be like the mantra of you know like my practice, the motto of my practice. And we have seen, and a lot of people have spoken about it, but kind of the life of the building does not kind of start or end when the building is done or the project is hand over the project to the clients. I think architecture, even Cedric Price, who have very heavily influenced by my thesis, he says architecture is not an object in space. That's how we usually see architecture, as like these objects sitting in space, but it's rather events in time, like how it unfolds along the time, how things change, how materials weather. I think weathering of materials is really important in Japanese architecture. So like kind of the wood they use, the way it transforms. And the idea of time in Japanese architecture is at different scales, at everyday scale, how the materials, the light falls on materials, how the every day the light changes, the kind of, the psicography changes, things are in light, things are in dark, and the way you see materials through lightness and darkness, to like 100-year or a 50-year time scale in which the way material weathers, things degrade, and how people kind of use their architecture. I think this entire scale and timeline of architecture is very important to be understood, rather than just, at still moments or still photography of architecture. I think it's this time span of 50 years. We have to build and experience and, keep on revisiting things, or because architecture is going to change. The way people are going to use it's going to change. There was this, one of my favorite projects is Toyo Ito's U House. It's a very early project, but it's a really beautiful house, very simple. There's a long slit of light. The light kind of washes on this curved wall, and because there's like a linear light on a curved wall, it has a really beautiful like a play on that wall. But also just the way the building kind of, there was a building, then it was overgrown by green. You could not even see the building. Then it dried off, and then the building kind of was in crumbles, and then the building was demolished. I think this entire lifespan of a building from when it's built to when it is demolished, I think that's what an architect should kind of, try to imagine and understand. And that's what kind of his work should be, rather than just handing over a project, employing a photographer to shoot one, stills, and that's it, you're done. And like, bye bye. I think, yeah, again, so this, all of this was happening in my head when I was in my fourth year. And then I really wanted to then go to Japan and see all of this happening and, work and experience all of this. And then that's when I applied to Fujimoto's office. Luckily, I got in. There was again my intention there was less of an office, more of a travel. So I took like 1 month. I kept 1 month for me, like almost 3 weeks for me to travel, and I was just working. So my internship again there was very short. I've done these really short internships in my life, but so that was again like a 2.5 month internship. Like I was traveling for almost good 2.5, 3 weeks of my time there. And Japan is incredible. I mean, you kind of, you go there and you understand what time really is. Like the season changes, and then once it's really cold and white, and then there's cherry blossom, and then there's spring, and the way architecture kind of reacts to all these seasons there, it's incredible to see. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. No, I always feel, architects have a very beautiful way of experiencing and enjoying things more than a layman, because we really appreciate the details, the subtleties of all these things, which is really nice. Yeah. But, you kind of skipped over your thesis thing. You
Sorry,
wanna?
skip over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was this idea of understanding time in architecture, and kind of that became my key start to the thesis. And then at that time, then I started reading about Rahul's kinetic cities, and all of these, they have the idea of impermanence in them. I also read Alvin Toffler's Third Wave, in which he describes Cedric Price's project, and both the projects, actually Fun Palace as well as Pottery's Think Belt. In both the projects, architecture is ephemeral in his, like he has barely built anything, but he was trying to understand what are these events which can become architecture, rather than these objects or spaces becoming architecture. And then I tried to kind of test some of his ideas, especially of Pottery's Think Belt, onto my city of Bombay, where I was living at that time. And so from there, it kind of led to this whole idea of questioning what universities are. Are universities these really built, walled campuses? So they should be more kind of ephemeral, or, just in the city, or how can you kind of disintegrate that one kind of a large university into these fallen multiple universities which are spread across the city, which are more integrated in the city. So that's when I kind of something very similar to what Price did in Pottery's Think Belt. So I took this university it's called the Central Institute of Fisheries Education. It's a large university near the coast of Mumbai in Warsaw. And kind of I took the programs of those universities, and the program, so it's kind of a very peculiar situation there, because there's a fishing university. 100 meters from there is one of the most famous fishing villages of the city, which is the Warsaw Fishing Village. And they barely have any interaction. Like the students are studying fisheries there, and the fishing community is practicing fishing for over thousands of years. They are like the first inhabitants of the city. And interestingly, they occupy the same space, but there's barely any communication or the involvement between the two. Kind of there's because and one of the biggest reasons is there's this huge campus, it's walled, there's a main gate, there's a security guard who stands outside. The students who live there, they live in hostels which are inside the campus. I imagine them living in the fishing community and they're studying fishing. It could be something different. And then we have these really fancy high-tech labs which are also inside the university campus. So basically, a poor fisherman has no access to these resources. So I was trying to kind of the whole concept. Then I kind of understood what are the programs in the university, and I took those programs outside the physical building and I kind of integrated them within kind of different parts of the fishing villages across the city. Just not one fishing village, almost like more than 50, 60 fishing villages across the coastal city. So that the university was kind of disbanded and disintegrated into these large kind of swath of the entire city, and then was connected by a very simple ferry network. So that ferry network kind of became like the link between these all smaller kind of campuses. And I think the idea there was also whatever next things are built should be built inside these villages, so that whatever the built is not just one program. I think even Rahul speaks about that a lot, that future architecture cannot be monoprogrammatic. Like it cannot just be one program. If you're building something, the architecture should be able to kind of have multiple programs in it. It should be designed in that way. Like so similarly, I think the building or whatever, hopefully I kind of proposed, was supposed to be a place where the university, the students, the local community, the industry kind of all come together, and those spaces can be occupied by different kind of people at different kinds and times of the day. So not one single university, but like more community spaces which can become a university. It could be a community hall. It could be where fish auctioning is held. So it's kind of all of these things together. Yeah, that was my thesis.
Yeah, and Kaivan Mata was your guide, a thesis guide at that time?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, Kaivan was my guide, and actually, it's incredible to have someone like him as your mentor, because in one way he lets you do what you want, but in other way he does not also. So he kind of is very pragmatic in a way, and he was really helpful during the research stages. Especially I was in all this lost between fancy words, and I really wanted to get some of my Japan thing in, and there were a lot of things happening. I think a thesis guide role should not be telling what to do, but just in a way what not to do. And I think Kevin was really good with that. Like he knew what kind of what a failed thesis could be. Of course, he has immense experience. So he kind of subtly he lets you know what is not right or not working. Not so subtly with his words, but like just he lets you know what may not work, or what's a kind of an incorrect direction. But he'll never let tell you what is the next direction. That you have to find for yourself.
Right.
That you have to fetch yourself. So I think that's very important in a thesis. I was really lucky to have him, and then now we're almost friends, and we have kind of a good professional relationship as well. And then after that, it was through Kaiwan I actually got into UDRI, because he was working on the state of housing exhibition. They were just forming the research team. And I was in Japan that time interning, and then I just got an email from him, would you like to join? We're doing this exhibition on housing. And I think it's an excellent step. Again, till this time, I had not worked properly in an architect's office. I had zero working drawing experience. But I was always doing these short internships, mostly related to I mostly wanted to travel at that time. And then again, there was suddenly this opportunity to kind of get into research, again, not doing architecture or making drawings or something like that. And this was when I started. I came back from Japan, and I think the next week I joined UDRI. And I was a full-time research assistant there. And for 9 months, we were working on this project called the State of Housing, which kind of culminated in a 2-month exhibition, a conference, and 2 volumes of books on housing. So I think it's, and that's the link, that's where I met Rahul and interacted with Rahul because he was also one of the co-curators with Kaiwan. And then with Rahul, then I joined RMA. So that's kind of, everything then linked together from Japan to UDRI to RMA.
Yeah. So it's almost like, if you're on the right trail, things kind of unfold. You don't know how it's going to unfold, but, there are a lot of opportunities that keep arising.
hope to believe that. That's what it's been working like that. But I agree with you. I think if if you're on the, I mean, see, it's very difficult to define what the right path is.
Yeah.
If I would say if you're on a path, if you are there and you're doing what you like, and you're just with the right people, I think more than what you are doing, it's just who
Hmm.
you are with
Yeah.
is more important, because that's where the opportunities come from.
Yeah.
Opportunities come from people. So it doesn't matter what you are doing or where you are, more than kind of what people you are with, associated with. And then I've been extremely lucky since the beginning. Like first because of my dad, I got to know Pinkish or Palinda. Then because of my thesis, it's Kevan and Rahul. So I think I've been extremely lucky like that, in that way, to have this continuous, you know, like a chain of people who have been kind of there for me. Uh, and let's see how we go ahead. Like
Yeah.
now there's Robert who met at RMA, and he's also been incredible and very supportive.
Yeah.
So I hope that's kind of the link in the transition ahead.
Yeah. I want to briefly touch upon the your Sou Fujimoto episode in Tokyo. I just want to know,
Sorry?
what kind of work environment it is like in the studio, how things happen over there. It must be very different. So I'm very curious to know about that.
It was indeed very, very different. Um, and I knew what I was getting into, before
Okay.
I applied,
Okay.
right? And I spoke to my seniors who were there. Like a few of them worked at Rishi Rami's office before I joined Fujimoto. A few of
Hmm.
my seniors, and
Hmm.
I knew the work environment. I knew what I was expecting. But at that time, my focus was more on going to Japan, rather than
Hmm.
what's going to happen there was secondary for me.
Hmm.
So I don't know if it's right or wrong. Again, that we can discuss. It's a separate thing. Ethically, if you kind of have that practice, there's no pay. Obviously, I was working for free as an intern there. All the expenses. Tokyo is an incredibly expensive place to live. So you're investing a lot of money to go and work in someone's office. So I would never do that again, nor would I do that to someone. But in terms of experience, we worked 16, 18 hours a day, but it never felt like that. Mostly all the interns are kind of involved in a lot of rigorous model making exercise. I think that's what is possible in Japan, because you have like an army of free interns, and that's something you can't do in, say, Europe or in India.
Hmm.
You can't spend so much time. You don't have that much free resources with you that you can get so much time on design development. But I remember for one project, I made at least 100, 120 like small scale iterations, mastering iterations of a model. And even if you have to just change one angle, just cut something, you don't touch an existing model, you kind of start afresh. And then you have this incredible series, an incredible story to say after these 120 models. And that design development, I think in Japan, what I learned was how important it is to kind of have that design development phase. That continued even in RMA. I mean, we've been also working at RMA, and how the whole, I mean, even when the project is under construction, it is, I would say, it's under design development. It's not kind of finished. And the projects we're working on. So I think that phase of constantly kind of trying to change, that two sets of architects I would define. One, before the construction starts, you have this set of 200 working drawings ready, issued to be site, and the architect then doesn't have to even visit the site. The contractor kind of takes over, and then everything is done. And then there are these. I mean, it could be different across. There are different reasons, different scales of project, but then there are these different kind of group of people. Like even when you built a column, you are kind of ready to break that column on site. Like there are these kind of two extremely different ends of ways of working. And what I realized in Japan is it was kind of in the middle. So we spent an extreme amount of time on design development. I think that's why this working 18 hours, and when you have an army of free interns, you can afford to do that. And I'm saying that's why people in perhaps in Europe or in India, we can't kind of do that. We can't have speed like on that one kind of a medium scale project. I think I also remember one of my colleagues, he was just working on an art installation. It was kind of a bell on top of a hill, and then that guy had to model the hill as well as that bell, and he did almost like 30 models of that. It was not even like like a built wall or an architecture or
Yeah.
something. So I think that design development phase, I learned how important that is. And then Fujimoto used to barely be in office through the day. I think he used to, so our days used to start at 9:30, 10 o'clock. And then he used to come to office. We used to work all day. There were different things which we were kind of working on. Uh, and then that's and we whatever we the work we used to produce, especially the seniors, they were working on renders for competitions or some drawings. They used to pin that up so that at the entrance, there was the old office. I think the Fujimoto architects have moved to a new office now, but in the old office, at the entrance there was this long corridor on the left hand side. On that long corridor, they used to kind of pin up these sheets, whatever happened through the day on top of the old sheets. There were at times there were like 50, 60 sheets pinned up, and you could really see the whole process behind those sheets happening. And then the latest sheets kind of came on top, and we still had sheets from 1 week back of the design development. And then Fujimoto used to just silently walk in, see those drawings. He had a pen. He used to mark things, mark his inputs on there. And then obviously he had discussions with the group. But just late night, he used to come, have coffee in his hand, and then just kind of mark those drawings, mark his inputs. That was quite nice. And then he used to stay in the office till 8:30, 9 o'clock sometimes, or 10 o'clock. And we used to be in the office till 10:30, 11, 12. I mean, there was no limit then. But I never felt stressed. I was drained physically, but never emotionally. Because if you're enjoying what you're doing, even if it's, making 100 models, but you know why you're making that 100 models, then you kind of enjoy it. If you don't know why you're doing it, and you just kind of keep on doing it, then it's just a boring exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if he comes during the night, what does he do in the morning, in the daytime?
I think he does a lot of site visits. He at that time was a professor at the University of Tokyo. So I think he was involved with that. I'm not. That's what I think he was busy with, and I also think he had a lot of lectures and site visits and things which keep meeting people. We kept him involved.
And what's the team size at the office?
At that time, I think we were around 35 to 40 people. It was an interesting way. The office was kind of divided. So there were like 3 teams. One was like the Chinese team, in which there were a lot of projects happening in China. So you need that kind of people from China to understand the language and then also communicate with the clients there. So there's a Chinese team, and mostly all the Indians kind of were also involved with kind of projects, and all the projects in like Southeast Asia and China. We went to that project or that team. There was a second team, which was the Japanese team, in which obviously all the locals and all the local projects were happening. And the third was a European team with kind of, because he had an office in France as well, so kind of coordinating with that office as well as doing a lot of competitions in Europe. So the office was kind of divided by into these 3 teams. Each of these teams had like a head or a principal, and like a team of architects and a large army of interns in each team.
So how many interns were there when you were there?
In my team, we were 6 of us.
Okay.
I think almost similar size in other teams as well. So I would say there are around 10 to 15 interns at any given time. And that's a large number of interns.
Yeah. And how does things work there? Because is there a language barrier? How do you communicate with the team? How does that happen?
I did not. There is definitely a language barrier, especially kind of with the Japanese team. So with the Europeans, they are comfortable with English. The Chinese team with the Indians, they're very comfortable. And Fujimoto is extremely convenient, like comfortable with English, compared to other kind of star architects in Japan who are not. So it was not difficult kind of communicating or coordinating things in the office, and especially when your projects kind of are based on what you're doing. And I think even with the younger people in Japan, like the other interns I have, or the other young junior architects, they were kind of comfortable in English. It was, I think it's more or less kind of little older than our generation kind of were not that good. But I think that's also changing. Even when I traveled across Japan, yes, there's a large language barrier, but the cities are so well designed and so well organized. Everything is just, you just know where things are, like even their maps or the way you kind of navigate the subway system or the metro system, you just know where to be, and everything is so clear. I mean, everything is kind of in written. It's all designed so that the tourists can come and understand things, but it's extremely easy to navigate and understand. And I have never found any, I mean, even at any shopping mall or 7-Elevens or metro stations, I never had to actually interact with someone. It was that kind of easy, like going into this Tokyo metro system, which is kind of the largest metro system in the world. But still, I did not even have to speak to anyone to understand that system, because it's the drawings. I mean, the diagrams are it's so diagrammatic and it's so well defined and organized. I think it's easy. I mean,
Hmm.
language was never a barrier,
Right.
and as you say, design is also a language, and we
Yeah.
kind of went around the country through through that language, and I spoke through that language.
Hmm. And how much is like the average cost of living that you had to incur for your stay?
Uh, this is almost like 4 or 5 years back. I
Hmm.
was really frugal on my eating because I'm a vegetarian, so I could barely eat out. So I
Hmm.
actually made 2 meals, 3 meals a day for myself in the middle of working hours. Luckily, I was living right next to the office. So for lunch, I used to quickly go to my hostel, cook something there, eat, again go back, then dinner, come back to home, eat, and go back to office after dinner. So it was easy, but I saved a lot of money not eating out, which is actually a sad thing because I would love to eat out. But again, that's where I faced one language barrier for sure. Like it's extremely difficult for them to understand what a vegetarian meal is. But everything, I mean, fish is vegetarian there.
Yeah.
Eggs are vegetarian everywhere apart from India. So I think it's in that way it was difficult. But then even that exactly I knew what I was getting into before I went this. I was kind of fully prepared for cooking there. So I saved some money there, but I would still say I spent around. I mean, I was traveling a lot in the metros, and yeah, I spent. I mean, whatever I saved on eating, perhaps I spent more on traveling.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
museum tickets and all of that. I think I spent around 60 to 70,000 a month there.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, like normal
uh,
expenses. Yeah, on a budget.
and it could be more. I mean, I was living in a really, really kind of a cheap. I mean, not cheap compared to Indian terms, but cheap
Hmm.
compared to
Right.
uh, the Japanese standard
Hmm.
hostel. There was like a large community kitchen, and there were these bunker beds, but like like how Japanese bunker beds are. Where they're like
Yeah.
three people in a row, and they're like
Yeah.
hundreds of rows next to them. So
Yeah. Okay, and after all of that, UDRI happened, the exhibition happened, and then you got into RMA. So,
yes, yeah,
so like just not RMA. I think even living in Mumbai itself is a big experience. It's a whole different world out there, and a lot of interesting memories you have. Working and living
so
in Mumbai.
yes, but I mean, it was not after RMA. I think that whole shift already happened when I joined undergrad school
Right.
in
Right. Yeah.
Bombay,
Hmm.
and my school was in this really upscale Juhu area, so it was initially not that bad. Like
Hmm.
when I went there in first year, my house was close to college, and
Hmm.
it was all kind of easy, kind of
Hmm.
going. But then eventually, architecture with kind of you have to step out and you have to stand in the sun and you have to kind of uh, even for your projects, even if they're just academic projects and you can get away with doing those things, or uh, but a lot of our projects in the school were contextually kind of placed in the city of Bombay. I think all my 9 semesters, except for one semester which we had in Dharamshala, all the 8 kind of other projects, including my thesis, was kind of based in the context of the city of Bombay. And once you kind of get that, you kind of then have to understand the city. I mean, it's a big term, understanding city, but just like navigating the city, speaking to people, traveling in local trains, eating out, and there's such a huge kind of a variety of things you can experience in the city. Be it smells, like a lot of people complain Bombay is smelly. It is smelly, and that's kind of one experience of a city. Like the fish smell. It was kind of very different. But then you get used to it. Then the number of people, it's overwhelming at once. But then in the end, you'll be like you feel uncomfortable when people are not around you. Like
Yeah.
or it could be food. There's incredible street food, especially for vegetarians, and in a way, food kind of speaks a lot about kind of the culture which is there in that space. Obviously, it does. And Bombay is such a cosmopolitan culture, then you kind of have everything at your you kind of get everything to eat and you go out. And so I think the experiences are just like like even kind of the way people live, there's so much difference, like people from living in informal settlements to these really super fancy buildings. Just the way kind of they kind of they turn up together, or and so many people have. Kaiwan has written about, his book called Alice in Bhuleshwar, in which he's trying to navigate those really tiny streets in Bhuleshwar, or when Rahul speaks about kinetic cities, and how these during Ganpati festivals, a lot of these people come together and kind of create a temporary city within a city, and you get to see these things, and you kind of, and before I read these notes, or before I read these books, when you have kind of also experienced this, you kind of understand what they're talking about. You see this huge, massive people coming out for Ganpati Visarjan on Juhu Beach, and the next day kind of, and you kind of, I lived very close to Juhu Beach at that time because my college was in Juhu. So just seeing that one stretch of beach transform itself through different days and seasons, in monsoon, the seas are wild, the sounds are different, the smells is different. Then otherwise, it's the chapati smell, there's a lot of people, extremely crowded, but not that crowded as like a Ganpati festival. And during Ganpati or Chhat Puja time, it's packed with people, and just the smells and sounds are different. So you see this kind of things changing and happening. And again, this whole idea of time in architecture, it's the, these events in space, which again, I am just repeating myself. These are the events in space, which kind of build the city, and not those objects in space.
Right.
And that's when I kind of then, and this happens at almost every nook and corner of the city, like Bombay is an ever transforming city. Nothing kind of is static. One day you see something, the second day it's there, not there.
Yeah.
There are very few constants there, everything.
Yeah.
When people say it's a constantly moving city, it's not just the people are changing or the people are moving. A lot of things are changing and moving with kind of the people. And I think that's very unique to the city of Bombay, I would say. And not so, and I also think because a lot of kind of migrant population and students and all of that, and the kind of the culture they create, it is kind of an ephemeral culture rather than, like in Aurangabad or any other place in the country, which is kind of more static and more of its own. So that's what I really like about Bombay, and I kind of miss that about Bombay.
Yeah. How's Juhu Beach, by the way? I heard that like cleaning it up and it's like super nice and fancy now. Is that true?
Cleanest Juhu Beach I've seen is after it gets the dirtiest. So after Ganpati, with the 10th day of Ganpati Visarjan, there's a lot of mess on the beach. But then almost the entire city, students from all over the schools, different organizations, Rotaract and Lions Club, everyone gets together. Everyone has their gloves on. I've done that a couple of times in 2 years. And everyone, the entire city gets to clean that one patch of land. And after 2 days of the Ganpati Visarjan, that's the cleanest beach you'll ever see. So if you have to see it's pristine, if you go there after 2 days after the Ganpati Visarjan. Apart from that, it's again a very interesting space, as I told you. Like in the daytime, it's kind of very quiet. In the mornings, people are walking. The people from Juhu, jogging there, walking there. In the evening, it becomes this huge touristy destination. We don't even understand why it's so touristy.
Yeah.
But then it becomes this huge. I don't know what's happening now because of COVID times, but becomes this huge touristy festival. And there are barely any places to see there. And I think the two biggest attractions in Juhu, especially for outsiders, is Amitabh Bachchan's bungalow and just like the beach right there.
Yeah.
And then it gets so crowded. It's nice. These things were very new to me. Like for me, it was I've been always in Aurangabad, and then just to see these things, it's kind of just understanding the scale of it, and the scale also changes throughout the day. Sometimes it's just that one patch is active. At night, just the entire stretch becomes active, and it's just the changing nature of a lot of things in Bombay. Actually, it keeps.
When I was looking for places to stay in Mumbai from the office, the closest I could find was like 20 kilometers away from office. And then I was talking to a couple of people, and then they were like, "Oh, nice, you good find. You got something really close by your office." And I said, 20 kilometers out of I would be out of Hyderabad from my place, because it's so peculiar.
I have barely seen people talking in terms of kilometers. That's again this one shift I had to make. We're always talking in time. We're always talking in terms of how much time does it take to get to office. Whenever I say, if you have asked me this question, how far is your house? How far was your house in Bombay from RMA office? I would say 40 minutes. I would never say, 10 kilometers or 12 kilometers. That's never how you define distance. It's like, defining, how light year is. It like
Yeah.
the amount of time light takes
Yeah.
to travel this, it's
Yeah.
something like that. So
Yeah.
it's about the time, not kind of the distance, because the time, it's what matters.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, it doesn't matter even if it's 40 kilometers, but if you live very close to the station, that's better than living 10 kilometers away, but then you have to walk like 2 kilometers to get an auto rickshaw or a train or something, like it's that way in the city.
Hmm. You're saying, sharing some instances when you said, people find most of their life happening in the trains, because that's like a significant amount of time goes in traveling. So you see people, cutting vegetables, and I was like blown away, hearing all of this, because that's where they save time to do, all of this.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if it's something to be celebrated. I think these are some of the bad kind of things,
Yeah.
or things which need to be corrected about the city. I don't think so. Anyone should be cutting or chopping vegetables
Yeah.
in the train, or kind of having a fun time. I mean, fun time is fine, but kind of doing the household chores in the
Yeah.
train is perhaps not the right thing, and that's just the way the city is designed, or like it's a lot of it is deliberate. A lot of there's no affordable housing near workspaces. If you have to find an affordable house, you have to really kind of go really far. There have been a lot of hits and misses that could have been really nice affordable housing in the heart of the city if Charles Korea would have been listened to at multiple times, with the parade redevelopment or with Navi Mumbai. But things didn't happen that way, and because of a lot of political, or as they say, economical kind of influences, there's no economical housing around places of work, and that's why people have to travel far and far and far. And that's why when I tell you, it's not the distance, it's the time. Like if it's someone who's spending 2 hours traveling, it's not the distance that matters to him. He may be traveling for 100 kilometers or 50 kilometers. He's spending 2 hours one way in a train, and then he has to utilize that 2 hours of a time. And I've seen people who have made lifelong friends. They play cards on the train. They chop vegetables. They sing bhajans. Everything happens in train. Like this is again like the uniqueness about Bombay. There's this Warkari Yatra which happens every year. It's a very famous thing in kind of in Marathi culture, in which a lot of people go towards this temple town called Pandharpur, and that yatra or that procession is called the Warkari. I mean, called the Warkaris, and that they have to go to Pandharpur at particular time of the year during Ekadashi. And that journey symbolically, people in Bombay do in the train. So like Churchgate station, they kind of make a temporary Pandharpur station, like a village, like the DT is kind of placed there at Churchgate station. And their journey from Vasai, Virar or Borivali to Churchgate becomes that journey for them. So they are in that time, on that particular day, they are singing bhajans and everyone's dressed in white, and they all become Warkaris for that day. And symbolically, they do their journey in the train. So that train also kind of is not a static thing, it's just not taking you from one place to the other. Even if the destination is same, it kind of changes on kind of, time of the year, or, a lot of things kind of influence things. I mean, that train is literally like the lifeline of that city. And a lot of, yeah, but things need to be changed. Like, exactly. I would never, it's a unique thing, but I would never celebrate chopping kind of vegetables in a train. That's kind of sad.
No, so peculiar, isn't it? And you've been in Bombay for so many years. Do you know why it's not happening? Why is, affordable housing not happening? Why is all, and will it ever happen? Or has it, have people moved on from it? Is that something you cannot expect anymore?
That's a difficult question. Like, currently now, I mean, there's, first of all, one of the reasons why housing is expensive, because there's no land left. I mean, there are lots of land which are kind of vacant and which will come up for development. Like, hopefully, touchwood, the eastern waterfront, there are different proposals, and I hope there are some affordable housing options there. But as and when land parcels opened up in Bombay, we have always lost that opportunity to kind of have either affordable housing, or when we had affordable housing, we didn't have the correct kind of transport systems. Like after kind of the mills disappeared, and and Parel was an industrial area full of mills, and when the textile mills, and when the mills stopped working, those huge parcels of land became available to the city. Charles Korea and the whole team had kind of given a proposal of 33%, where 33% was affordable housing, 33% was open spaces, and 33% was supposed to be, like a commercial aspect of it. So you kind of the city sells off 33%, so they get revenue to build open spaces and affordable housing. But that never happened, that never materialized. So what we see in Lower Parel has become this most kind of an expensive destination to live. We have these really large towers and really high-end apartments. And all was left in terms of affordable percentage, like 2 or 3% of the land was made available to affordable housing, compared to a 33% was supposed to be made available. That was one of the biggest opportunities, kind of right in the heart of the city we lost to build affordable housing. And the second, when Navi Mumbai was proposed as kind of a satellite city, there were really interesting experiments with Raj Dewal or Charles Correa building affordable houses there for Silco. But what it lacked was the transport link to Bombay. So there were no direct trains, and it took a long amount of time. There was supposed to be this bridge, which is under construction now after 70, 80 years, but 60 years. But Charles Correa had proposed that link between Navi Mumbai and Mumbai quite a few years back. And if that link would have been made, there would have been like a good occasion for people to kind of move to that part of the city, live there, because there was land was available, housing was cheap. But as I've also learned in when I was working and doing the research, housing is just not in isolation. You can't just build a very cheap house somewhere. Like there are a lot of things around it. What happens? So even if the housing was available in Navi Mumbai, there was no way people could transport. There were very few schools or colleges around. So housing cannot be just understood in isolation of just that built unit of a 1 BHK or a 2 BHK. But what makes housing is a lot of things around it. So, even like does that housing support jobs? Does that housing support the cultural life of that person? Like I'm okay to move somewhere 50 kilometers away, but will I have my friends there? Will I have my society, my family there? That also matters a lot when a person is kind of making a decision to move somewhere. Will I have transport systems there? Will I have college, hospitals which are nearby? All these things are important. So you have to kind of build housing with thinking of these things. So Navi Mumbai, again, it was a lost opportunity. So there were these opportunities which came by in the history of Bombay. In the recent history of Bombay, I mean, there have been different experiments earlier, which kind of we lost. Now there's this another opportunity with the Eastern Waterfront redevelopment. Again, a huge parcel of land which is coming up for development. And I hope kind of that kind of materializes and we have large affordable houses which kind of come up there.
A lot of these insights that you talk about housing actually also came up through the exhibition, the state of housing that you were a part of. How can people refer that material or the research work that you've
Right. So basically, as I said, the research kind of culminated in a 2-month-long exhibition and two sets of books. One set of book talks about kind of 80 different experiments in the city, in the country, in terms of housing. So there are more like case studies, which we call chronotopes, which kind of start right at Chandigarh in 1940. I mean, in 1947-48, the whole. What was the housing imagined in Chandigarh? Because that was, we were a newly formed country. Two kind of the most recent examples in Bombay, where we have these SRA schemes, and it covers almost 80 different examples in the middle of different kind of experiments in housing. So that's one volume of the book, which was again a big part in the exhibition. And second volume is more about the whole history of housing and the development of housing in India, and a lot of essays by well-known academic researchers in the country and their essays on housing. And these two books are available at UDRI. Sadly, they are not available online. You have to either send a check or a demand draft to UDRI, and then they will kind of courier you the books wherever you want them. But right. That's the only way you can kind of access that material. And I think it's both the volumes together. I think they are kind of very definitive, and they have a lot of. I would say in next 5 years, 10 years, I think it'll be important reading and referencing materials to come with the State of Architecture exhibition.
Amazing. And finally, I want to talk about the last segment of you working at RMA. You've been there for the last 3 years, 2.5 years, if I'm not wrong.
3 years.
Yeah.
3.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting stuff always is happening at RMA. You have you have a research vertical, you have a practicing wing, and then you always have a lot of these interesting exhibitions which are curated through RMA and all of these other things that happen. So how was your learning at RMA over the last 3 years?
So I think first of all, I think RMA obviously starts with Rahul, and sometimes I personally feel there are two Rahuls in this world. One which we don't know about, and one we see every day. It's like Amir Khan in Room 3. There's somewhere I don't know how that man gets so much amount of work done. He's a full time kind of professor at GSD. Then he knows everything about all the projects at RMA. Then he has his research happening. He kind of speaks every week. So I don't know how that guy, I either he spends 48 hours or 24 hours, and or he kind of, there are two Rahuls which we don't know about. But that's where I realized that when I was at I didn't realize that actually when I was working with UDRI, he was so involved in the exhibition. I didn't know that he was so involved at RMA as well. And then when I joined RMA after completing UDRI, and I was completely taken back, like that guy is doing 30 projects, but he's also kind of did a huge exhibition just like a week back. I mean, just like a huge research kind of a part like for my last 9 months. And he was also full-time professor at GSD. So, but apart from that, I think because of this exact reason, he trusts people a lot, and he gives them a lot of and kind of how do I put it, responsibilities in a way. So when I joined office in my first week, I was supposed to do, and as I told you, I had no working experience before this. I was just traveling, or I had this UDRI experience. This was my first architecture experience in a true sense. And in the first week, I was supposed to lead a project, the first week of joining, and I was supposed to have this meeting to discuss an intense structure with the structural designer, and I was really overwhelmed. I mean, I was really scared at some time, but because of that responsibility and the trust he puts on you, and the entire office, this is not Rahul, even Robert and Pyle, or the office culture is such that they put enormous amount of trust in you, and I think that trust is extremely important when you're working in that office, especially of the scale. And then that let me kind of first of all grow and learn very fast, like having meeting and leading a meeting with a structural engineer in the first week of your office. You kind of get into it directly. You have no time to adjust or to understand a building, or how working drawings work. Everything at RMA is learning by doing. There's no other way I can put about it, and I'm sure you must have also realized this by now. And even if they are interns, I don't think we kind of treat interns, or there's a separate kind of a program for internship at office. Everyone does everything, and it's because of this. And the more they trust you, the more faster you grow in this office, and it's an extremely professional kind of a setup. This is exactly how I would want my office to be in future. Uh, just the way kind of you know we have some hierarchy. I think that's important, especially when Rahul is not here. But that's not, I would say, a very rigid or a definitive kind of hierarchy in the office. It's very not casual, but very organized, and it's very very efficient the way we work. Extremely efficient, and also the good part is, since Rahul was already in the stage, we had this already developed this long distance remote working kind of. We were very comfortable with it. So as we transitioned into this remote working system, it was, I think, the
Effortless.
easiest for us.
Yeah.
Like it was super easy for us to work from homes. And now I think it is not very different from what I used to be working in the office, except for like we were physically together. But I don't see any kind of changes in the kind of quality of design. Perhaps we all collectively think the design quality has improved. But I don't see any difference in the kind of conversations we're having just because we're working remotely, or work wise we have kind of lagged of there. I think we're right there. It was super easy for us to kind of transition. uh,
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. And also when you're working in an office like that, there always is the certain amount of influence and baggage that you take on, like even when you were in Sri Lanka or in Japan, now here, and now you're at this point where you're starting your own practice. So how is this going to manifest or not manifest in your practice? This is my last question. Yeah.
I really hope it does. And I really hope all of the experiences, I would say, uh, be it from Pinkish's office or Sri Lanka or case design or UDRI or RMA, I think all of the offices have learned something very unique about all of these offices. And all of them are successful practices, like all of them. And I've learned some very unique things about all of it. Just the way office or materials or just hands-on stuff at case design, whereas just the office works in at RMA or in Japan, how much time you put into design development, or in Sri Lanka, how you actually kind of sit in the nature and live with snakes and still work. I think these are all very unique things I learned from all these kind of different spaces. And as I told you, most of them have also been educators, like Pinkish or Rahul or Palinda or Fujimoto. So I really hope kind of I to become one. Like even Kevan, apart from his research, he is also teaching at SEPT and at my school doing thesis. So I really hope all of this kind of manifests into what I want to do, and I want to do, like, I recently I spoke somewhere and I told this. I still am, and like this in 2011, I think Google Earth was launched, and in 2012 I was in my 12th standard when I now first downloaded Google Earth, and it's kind of equivalent to when people saw the image of satellite image of Earth for the first time. Like that was in 1960s when the Earth rising image or the blue the blue dot image became very famous. For me, it was that same time, like on Google Earth. And that was the same time I was trying to pick on the profession, like after 12th standard, I wanted to kind of why and why not to become an architect. And that time I downloaded Google Earth and I was really scared, like when you kind of flip through and you see what you build stays on Earth, stays on this planet for a long time, so you should be very careful with what you're building, or, you should be very kind of, that's why I mean, when I'm starting practice, I am really scared to even put one line on this planet, because I know when I'm putting something there, it's going to stay on for years and people are going to see it from, you see it from space. So that's kind of, before I start my practice, I just kind of then want to understand and try something so that, like as minimal, not in terms of aesthetics, but in just in terms of, before, all these words are also, I didn't even know about green architecture in class 12, like I didn't know anything about it, or I didn't know what green buildings are. But I just know the concept, I know that if I want to build something and I want to leave a mark on this earth, it should be kind of something which is, worth it for Earth. I mean, everything you build is going to be bad, but how minimally then you can kind of build and use materials, or do something which is even ephemeral, like things, it should be able to disappear or change, because if you're not building buildings which are not multifunctional, like what Rahul says, or they're not ephemeral, what I learned in Japan, or they don't change with seasons or times, or if you're not ready to accept that's going to disappear one day, then I think you're doing injustice to this whole planet and the way we're living. So uh, very deep, but I hope you are trying to you understand what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I'm still very scared to build anything. Like I have this trauma on my fact that I don't want to put something that I know will stay on this earth for a long time. And I don't want to see my buildings from Google Earth. So I just want to have some sort of an invisible building system or something. I don't know.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Ayush. I think that's a lovely note to actually end this conversation. That's something that we should all think about, and something that we should also be scared about. When we should exercise architecture with caution, and with a lot of a lot of context, and understand things, and be as sensitive as we
We
can.
are the only ones who can do something, and the face of the earth is changing because of architects and engineers.
Yeah,
No other profession, a doctor is not kind of trying to change the face of the earth,
yeah,
or a accountant, or anyone else for that matter. It's us, and it's been us since millennia. Like we've been living, and we have the idea of dwelling has been there for millions of years, and it's us as architects and engineers who are kind of changing the face of the earth. So we should be extremely careful even before we draw one line, because that one line is going to change the way the earth looks for a very long period of time. So
Absolutely. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Ayush, for doing this. Finally, I'm so happy that we finally got the time and opportunity to do it.
persuasion.
I hope I didn't bother you too much.
No, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I'm glad I found a forum to speak nonsense and blabber my thoughts out. But someday, perhaps after 5 years, I'll be laughing at my own thoughts. But at least I'll have something to laugh about, like in 5 years. Or maybe not, but let's see how it goes.
Thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you.